Just moments earlier, frantic 999 calls for help.
Please, quick now. The man is wielding a knife. He's threatening me. He's killed David Amos at Belfast Methodist Church.
With the attackers still inside, the unarmed officers decide they have to push forward.
Mate, drop the knife! Drop the knife now! Get it down! Right, search him.
With the attackers subdued, medics were finally able to reach the stricken MP. But Sir David died at the scene, having suffered more than 20 stab injuries. As he was booked into custody, terrorist Ali Harbi Ali openly admitted his motivation.
Domestic or hate-related in any way? Pardon?
Terror.
In his rucksack, the 12-inch-long murder weapon.
When I first came in.
Okay.
Despite denying murder in court, in police interviews, the 26-year-old was more candid.
Mr. Ali, is this a terrorist attack?
I mean, I guess, yeah. I killed an MP. And I've done it. Yeah.
Okay.
Ali showed the first signs of radicalisation in 2014 and was briefly referred to counter-extremism programmes. Ali had been planning an attack for at least 5 years before he finally struck, scoping out a number of potential victims. As he begins life behind bars, Sir David's killer has never shown any remorse for the murder of a much-loved and deeply respected Member of Parliament.
Last week, Mr. Ali told the court all the things any creature more sentient than an earthworm could have predicted, he'd say. He wanted to join ISIS, but it was too difficult getting over to Syria, so he decided to kill Sir David in Southend instead. Quote, I thought I couldn't go join Islamic State. I should try and do something here to help Muslims here. So to help Muslims here, he murdered an MP. No, Mr. Ali doesn't describe it as murder because, quote, I don't think it's unlawful, which is why, presumably, as the jury read out the verdict in an English court, he declined to stand. So, amazingly enough, Sir Lindsay Hoyle and all those MPs and all those ghastly columns about the tone of our public discourse were all total blithering, codswalloping balderdash. A couple of quotes. The Guardian, Nadine Dorris commits to online safety reforms in memory of David Amos. Sky News, US Capitol riot shows what happens when you whip up a mob, Speaker warns after MP's murder. So according to Sir Lindsay, it's all something to do with the same kind of thing as Donald Trump was whipping up on January the 6th in America. You're not really much of a friend if you talk complete rubbish about why he was murdered. We dishonour an honourable man when we lie about why he is dead in the most bloody and brutal way possible. Andy No is on the internet and on the streets and is the author of Unmasked, Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy, and he's a man you should pay attention to. Andy, you've seen this in America and elsewhere around the world, but it's particularly galling when it's so obvious as it was last fall here. Why cannot we tell the truth of why this man is dead?
Well, what struck me as an American when I heard this news last year of the brutal killing of an MP in a church, which, by the way, throughout the entire British history of since Parliament has existed, there's only been very, very few who have been killed while serving office. So it's historical in that way. Just what surprised me is that how quickly the British public just forgot about the killing of one of its member of parliaments. You saw then and you see now more coverage on American issues such as the 6th of January or other things like that. But over and over for years now, this is no surprise to you and I, whenever there's a suspicion that there's a jihadist nexus to any of these deadly attacks in my country or your country or somewhere else in Western Europe, the response from the public and the press and politicians and the chattering classes is to look away. I mean, last year we had a British Muslim who went to America to carry out an attack at a synagogue, and that should have been a bigger story than it was. But I think most of my American peers have probably forgotten about that as well.
Yes, and there's almost, there was a rather cynical line that MI5 used to use at the time of the Irish Troubles, that you could hold it down to an acceptable level of violence. And if you put it less cynically, it's the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, who said that this sort of thing is just part and parcel of what it means to live in a diverse, vibrant world city. In other words, we should just be quiet and get used to it, that this is just going to happen and we should just get used to it. Is that a valid public policy?
No, there are vibrant big cities around the world that don't suffer jihadist attacks regularly. I'm thinking of Seoul or Tokyo or Ho Chi Minh City or Bangkok, or, looking on this continent, you don't see these type of regular religious extremist attacks in Warsaw or in Budapest. So I think the statement that Sadiq Khan made a few years ago was more so that he was trying to prepare the public to accept this normality, that within this country, your security and investigative authorities have not been able to get a hold of the homegrown jihadist issue that you have.
Well, when you just mentioned all those cities you did there, Japan, it's widely known that Japan likes Japan for the Japanese. It doesn't have a lot of immigration, and it doesn't want any mass immigration, certainly. But the interesting thing, when you point to the continent, is that now, 30 years after the fall of the Iron Curtain, if you just draw a map of where jihadist attacks occur, and they happen in France, they happen in Germany, they happen in the Low Countries, in Scandinavia, and then mysteriously they all sort of stop at the Iron Curtain, because in those countries they don't have populations within which the urge to commit an attack such as this can incubate. I mean, do you think is there a reason why we don't address the most obvious factor here, which is Western European immigration policies versus Eastern European?
I think sometimes people will point to what they say are integration issues involving populations of immigrants and migrants who come from Muslim backgrounds, such as in the case of the now convicted jihadist here. But with Ali Harbi Ali, his parents weren't very vulnerable people. As was reported earlier, his father worked in very high office in his home country of Somalia. So I think what we're seeing here is that economic issues is not always it's quite often not the variable. You can see, yes, there are economically vulnerable people who carry out jihadist attacks, and then those who are, by all means and measures, quite integrated, such as this convict here who was born and raised in London and had the privilege of a good education and pursued education after completing his A-levels. So I mean, what I point to, as somebody who has written about these issues before, is I think it's the ideology the extremist ideology that has taken root in many communities in the West, and many years after 9/11, and after untold numbers of terrorist attacks on this continent, we still aren't really able to have the discussions openly.
Yeah, while you were talking, we were just looking at some of this extremely violent footage of the unarmed constables taking down this attacker. And as you say, he's had a fairly, what would be by the standards of almost anywhere on the planet, a very comfortable existence. This was true on the day we came in. On 9/11, Mohammed Atta and all those guys were, generally speaking, children of privilege from the Islamic world. The panty bomber, whose father in Nigeria tried to shop him to the CIA without any effect. But he was the guy who put a bomb in his underwear and tried to blow up his knickers over Detroit. He again was a guy who was a middle-class guy who had lived a very privileged lifestyle. So the economic issues, so where we have these programs that are trying to get into the head of people, which is the most difficult thing to do. And I wonder sometimes whether it's even worth trying with that.
I don't know. I don't want to be a pessimist, but given the Ali's statements in court, despite his upbringing entirely in the United Kingdom, he did not view the British state as legitimate. He did not view English law as legitimate. And you see that happening a lot with those jihadists who go to trial, such as the lone survivor of the Paris attacks, which the trials are ongoing in Paris. At the beginning of that trial, he blurted out an Islamic creed and said his allegiance to his prophet. And similarly, you saw that similar mindset here with Ali. I just wonder, what will it take for British lawmakers and decision makers at the government level to put more resources into addressing jihadist extremism within the country. I think PREVENT program is a good start, but from the sources I have of those who work in counterterrorism in this country, a lot of resources are diverted unnecessarily towards covering what the right-wing extremism, and that's really done for a political reason, when most of the violent extremist threats that are happening in England are coming from jihadist threats.
No, that's always true. We've seen that for years, that because they've got a big bunch of guys called Mohammed on the list, they have to find some fella who once went on a right-wing militia website in Texas just to add a little bit of diversity. The diversity of the PREVENT program is a critical factor. Thank you very much, Andy. Do go and follow Andy on Twitter, because he doesn't just pontificate from inside his luxurious abode. He is out on the streets and showing you stuff that you will not see on news shows round the planet. What do you reckon to all this? GB Views at gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at GB News. We're coming right back with